Hello everyone. Welcome to my video. I'd like to thank Healing Meditation Music for this, the music we'll have in this. I am going to be reading Echo by Munzo Ryan. It is a novel. Let's begin. 50 years before the war to end all. Wars. A boy played hide-and-seek with his friends in a pear orchard bordered by a dark forest. Martha, who was it, sat on a boulder, buried her head against her knees, and began to count to 100. The boy hurried away, determined to stay hidden longer than all the others, hoping to impress Martha. Her lilting voice intrigued him. Even now as she counted, her words sounded sing-song. 36, 37, 38, 39. Although it was strictly forbidden, the boy ran into the forest to hide. Every few yards, he looked back to make sure he could still see the pear orchard behind him. When there was nothing more than a speck in his view, he sat against a tree trunk within a cluster of pines. From far away, he heard Martha's faint call. "Ready or not, here I come." The boy smiled, thinking about the moment he would waltz back home base triumphant. He'd have to be patient, though, for it would take time for everyone to be rooted from their hiding spots. He pulled a book from his waistband, one of the two things he had bought that morning from a gypsy for a prevening. He ran his fingers over the embossed title in the leather cover. The 13th Harmonica of Otto Messenger. He had not been able to resist the purchase, especially with such a particular coincidence. The title held his given name, Otto. He opened the book and began to read. A witch, a kiss, a prophecy. Once, long before the enchantment was eclipsed by doubt, an anxious and desperate king awaited the birth of his first child. As it was written, the king's eldest child would inherit the kingdom, but only if the child was a son. If the firstborn was a daughter, the monarchy would someday pass to the king's younger brother, his most ardent rival. Alas, the queen delivered a girl, but the king was devious. Moments after the birth, he whisked the infant away and ordered the loyal midwife to take it deep into the forest and leave it for the animals. He forbade the midwife to ever speak of it again. Then the king told the queen and his subjects that the baby had not survived the birth. The kind-hearted midwife biked into the woods, knowing she would never abandon the child. As she pushed through the brambles and climbed over logs, she sang lullabies to the wide-eyed infant. When she stopped singing, the baby wailed. Time and time again, the midwife obliged, humming and crooning until she reached her destination. A tumble-down cottage that belonged to her cousin, a selfish and lazy witch. "Won't you take this child?" begged the midwife. "You already have goats for milk, and someday she might sweep the hearth for you." "I suppose," said the witch. "I will call her Eins." The midwife thought it cruel to give the baby a number instead of a name, but she knew it was a far better fate than becoming breakfast for the bears. She kissed the small bundle and whispered the one gift she could bestow, a prophecy. "Your fate is not yet sealed. Even in the darkest night, a star will shine, a bell will chime, a path will be revealed." She spat at the ground to secure the fortune, and left the child with the witch before she fled. Within 2 years, the queen delivered another daughter. The king gave the same instructions to the midwife, who stole to the forest, singing all the while for the baby, too, who would be consoled only with a song. At the cottage, the midwife beseeched the witch again. "Won't you take this child? Someday she might gather wood for you." "I suppose," said the witch, "I will call her Zui." Another number for a name. It seemed a false start, but still was a better fate than becoming lunch for the wolves. The midwife kissed the baby and whispered the prophecy again. "Your fate is not yet sealed. Even in the darkest night, a star will shine, a bell will chime, a path will be revealed." She spat at the ground to secure the fortune, left the child with the witch, and fled. 2 years passed, and yet another baby girl was born. $3, one after another. The king repeated the same deception, and the midwife dutifully traipsed into the forest, serenading all the while, for the infant's only solace, like her sisters, was the melody. When the midwife reached the college, she implored the witch to keep this baby too. Someday she might stroke the fire for you. "I suppose," said the witch, "I will call her Tree. Thus I can remember who was first, second, and third." She held up 3 fingers, taking one off after the other. "Eins, zwei, drei." Again, the midwife foresaw a bleak life ahead for the nameless child, yet one far better than becoming dinner for the wild boars. And she feared she would have her sisters for companions, Eins and Zwei, who were already in service to the witch, and toting small bundles of kindling, rushed to the midwife's side to see their sister. The midwife looked from the witch's bovel to the dirty, uncombed white waifs already cooing at the infant in her arms. She kissed the baby and whispered, "Your fate is not yet sealed. Even in the darkest night, a star will shine, a bell will chime, a path will be revealed." She spat on the ground to secure the fortune, left the child with the witch, and fled. At last, a month past a year later, the queen delivered a boy. The king happily proclaimed that his first child had been born, a son. Throughout the kingdom, church bells rang in celebration for a heir to be thrown, who would one day be king. Otto looked up from the book. He'd been so absorbed in the story, he'd forgotten the game of hide and seek. The forest had become cold and windy. The trees rustled and swayed. Otto shivered and looked toward the pear orchard, straining to hear his friends in the distance. He had missed the call. "Ollie, Ollie, Austin free," the signal for the ones who were still hiding to show themselves. He stood to leave, tucking the book in his waistband. A sudden gust lifted his cap from his head. Otto spun around until he caught it. He peered between the trees, but he had lost sight of the pear orchard. Otto wandered for hours. He yelled, but the wind grew stronger and muffled his calls. His mind raced with all that he had heard about the woods, the dripstone caves inhabited by trolls, dangerous precipices that dropped into witches' lairs, mud bogs that swallowed children in one giant slurp, not to mention the perils of bears, wolves, and wild boars. He rushed from tree to tree, searching for the way out. In his panic, he tripped over a berm of twisted roots and fell. The world swirled. Minutes or hours later, he wasn't sure. He sat up and touched his forehead. He felt a bump the size of an egg. Frightened, he covered his face with his hands and began to cry. Between sobs, he heard a trio of voices. "This way. Come closer. We will help you." Otto raised his head to see who spoke, but he only saw a fluttering of shadows through the trees. Whimpering, he stood, taking hesitant steps until he came upon a procession of fir trees that formed an immense circle. He sidled between the trunks and found himself in a clearing. 3 young women dressed in tattered frocks stood before him. The first a head taller than the other. The second was a head taller than the third. They all talked at once. "At long last a visitor. Hello, boy, you poor thing. You must be weary. Oh dear, you have hurt your head. Sit down and rest." Slowly, Otto sat on... Sorry, something happened to... I guess it just goes black after that. I can't see in this light. I'm sorry, hold on. That's better. I'll just put it on here for now. Stood before him. the first a head taller than... Oh, I'm sorry, let me go back to where I was. Slowly, Otto sat on a tree stump. Who are you? Do not be frightened. You are safe with us. I am Eins, said the tallest, and these are my sisters, Zwi and Dri. Otto pulled out the book and stared at it. But you couldn't be. Those are the very characters from this story. It must be our story then, said Eins. Perchance, does it have a happily ever after? Asked Zwi, wringing her hands. Dri pointed at the book. Might you read to us, so we know our providence? The three sisters quickly sat in a huddle around him, leaned forward, their eyes eager. Otto rubbed his brow, feeling lightheaded. He looked at Eins, Zwi, and Dri, who seemed hungry for the telling, as if the story was true. They must have been torn from their mother's arms. What must it have been like to never know her? His heart ached at the idea of never seeing his own mother again. Please, asked Zwi, perhaps we can help one another. Otto thought it was all strange, but he did feel safe within the tree circle. The sisters seemed harmless, and they appeared to only be the ones who might guide him out of the forest. He turned back to the beginning of the book and read the first chapter again, this time out loud. He glanced up. Eins, Zwi, and Dri held one another's hands and their faces rapt. Otto cleared his throat and continued. A secret, a spell, a final deed. Eins, Zwi, and Dri grew up in the far-off cottage in the woods. The witch told them they were fondlings, and reminded them every day of how grateful they should be for her generosity. But it wasn't easy to be grateful. The cottage was dark and ramshackled. The witch never replaced the thatch. She made the three sisters wear rags, and she did not love them. Heavens, no. She wasn't indifferent to them as she was a stone in the stream. But the witch found them useful, because from dawn to dusk they swept and toted and washed and cooked. Imagine how spoiled the witch had become. The sisters had two consolations in their life of drudgery. The first was singing. They had three distinct voices. The first, that of a bird song. The second, of a brook twinkling over smooth stones. And the third, the yodel of wind through hollow logs. When they sang, their voices blended so magically that the entire forest, from trolls to fairies, stopped to listen and marvel at their gifts. Even the witch recognized their talent, but at the same time, she was jealous. When she ordered them about, she snidely called them names of musical instruments, her favorite being My Little Piccolos. The sisters' older solace was one another. Every night as they lay on their pallets of straw and looked at the night sky through the holes in the roof, Eins repeated the midwife's prophecy as if it were a prayer. The fate is not yet sealed. Even in the darkest night, a star will shine, a bell will chime, a path will be revealed. Then they sang in turn about the little birds that easily took wing from the forest. For Eins, Zwi, and Dri had not given up on the hope that they too might someday leave. They dreamed of a safe and cozy home, of a family who loved them and called them by name. The years passed. The king's brother, his rival, died young. All of the king's manipulations had been for naught, but he still did not make known the horrible secret of abandoning his three daughters in the forest. As his son came of age, the misguided king took ill and relinquished the throne. The kingdom had hastened to prepare for the son's lavish coronation, but the king did not live to see it. Every subject was invited to the festivities at the castle and offered an audience with the newly crowned king. When it was the midwife's turn to approach the throne in the great ball, she realized there was no reason to keep silent any longer. She confided the story of the monarch and his mother, who were overcome with joy. Without ado, the young king set the midwife to find his sisters. Once again, the midwife traveled deep into the forest, into the cottage. When Eins saw the midwife approaching, she ran to her and asked, "Have you brought us another sister?" The midwife smiled. "Oh, child, I have brought so much more." Upon hearing the news of their family, Eins, Zwi, and Dri hugged one another, and cried from the happiness. The dreams they had carried in their hearts had come true. They had a home, a family, and they were princesses. When the witch saw that they were meant to go, she became furious. She raised her arms, and the forest shuddered beneath her fury. Pointing to the three sisters, she yelled, "Ungratefuls! You would leave me after all I've done for you? After I've saved your lives? Where would you be without me? Dead. That's where. If freedom is what you want, your choice comes at a price. Let's see how you like my burden, my little piccolos." The witch waved her wands and incanted. "A messenger brought you about. One and the same must bring you out. You may not leave an earthly form. Your spirit's to a windland born. You save a soul from death's dark door, or here you'll languish evermore." In a rush of ear-splitting wind, the witch, the midwife, the cottage, and every belonging from table to teacup swirled in the clouds, disappearing to another place and another time. When the air quelled, Eins, Zui, and Dri found themselves with only the clothes on their backs, confined in the large clearings of stones and stumps, surrounded by a circle of trees, in a world where the sun rose and set, yet time did not pass. Otto raised his eyes from the book's page, looking from sister to sister. Eins wiped a tear from her cheek. "It is all true. What happens next?" asked Zui. "Oh, you must read on. Do we reunite with our mother? Do we meet our brother?" asked Dri. Otto turns the page. The leaves were blank. He flipped through to the end of the book, but it was more of the same parchment with no words. "It is unfinished," he said. "There is no middle or ending, because we have not yet experienced anything after that page in the book," said Eins. "We've been here, bound forever as the witch's useless babbles." "What does the spell mean?" asked Otto. "She called us her little piccolos," said Zui. "So, to make it more difficult to break the spell, our spirits must be carried from the tree circle only inside a woodland by a messenger." Otto looked at the sisters, now desperate. "If I could get home, I could help you," he offered. "Do you have a woodwind?" asked Eins. Zui leaned closer. "A bassoon? Or an oboe, perhaps?" asked Dri. Otto shook his head. "I only brought one other thing." He began to unroll his sleeve, which has been folding into the elbow. "This morning, when I bought the book, the gypsy insisted I take this too, and did not ask for an extra puffing." He held up a harmonica. The eyes of the sisters brightened. Eins gasped, "A mouth harp!" Zui stood and came closer. "If you will allow us to play it, we will help you find the way home." Dri touched his arm. "But you must promise to pass along mouth harp to another when the time is right. For our journey to save a soul on the brink of death cannot begin until you do." Hold on. We'll stop there for today. My mom wants me.